Welcome to another episode of the Vulnerable Scientist podcast. And on this episode, this is a repurposed episode from the science media interviews that we've been doing. And this guest is called Verena Ras. Verena Ras has a very incredible story that you might want to listen through. And also, just to make you know that the person who is interviewing Verena Ras is Verena from Planet Wizard Africa, and I was also present in the interview. Maybe you'll hear me at the last portion of the podcast, and there isn't much that has been changed from this. There isn't much editing that has been done, and that was intentional because I love what comes with the real conversations.
I am Verena Ras. I am currently a bioinformatics training and outreach coordinator with an organization called HTA Bionet. It's a non-profit organization, and I'm currently based at the University of Cape Town. But in parallel to that, I am also registered as a PhD student at the University of the Western Cape, where I wear a slightly different hat. With HTA Bionet, I do a lot of bioinformatics training, but with my PhD, I'm actually doing a lot of marine biology, genetics, and taxonomy. So two slightly different hats, but they've kind of started to become very interrelated over the last few years, which has been quite exciting for me.
And it's an encouragement to us because we're always so focused on doing one thing. But here you are doing two or more complex things. So that's something for us to think about. So
it isn't easy, but yeah, I've been managing to make it work over the last few years.
Yeah, it shows that the human brain is really capable of doing a lot. So let's go to your background because we'd like to learn from you how you got to where you are currently, from early education. So I'll just do the stages from early education, to maybe high school, campus. So, but we'll just start with how was the experience with the early education as a child?
Sure. So for me, I kind of bounced around primary schools quite a lot. I went to 4 different primary schools, but I went to 2 schools on the Cape Flats, so I was always in Cape Town. I also did my high schooling year right in Cape Town, so I never left Cape Town. And once I matriculated, I moved to the University of the Western Cape, where I did my undergrad. And my undergrad was very interdisciplinary, so I did an undergraduate degree in conservation biology, actually. And just via that degree and everything that was required for my then mini thesis, I started to do a lot of, genetics, graphical information systems, a lot of biostatistics. And so that's why I kind of think of myself as a little bit of a jack of all trades, but a master of none yet. But I think of myself as a bit of a jack of all trades when it comes to science. But that's just owing to my educational background, my formal training, and also informal training, I guess, with volunteer, groups that I've worked with and so on. I think it's all contributed to what I've become as a scientist and as a trainer, especially as well. But very standard schooling. I did my schooling in the standard amount of time, nothing special. I wouldn't say I was even a special student, to be fairly honest. I was fairly average, if I can be blunt. Definitely not at the top of the crop, very much right in the middle, very mediocre in many ways as well. But I think that, I've grown over the years, of course.
To be fair, a lot of us find themselves in that middle average group, especially in the early stages of education. So
which is quite odd, right? I think a lot of scientists, more of us were sort of average rather than exceptional schooling.
Yeah, that's where a lot of us started anyway. So how did you end up choosing science?
So for me, it was a very, very early decision. I think when I tell people this, they kind of think I'm not being too truthful, but I kind of decided that I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was about 9 years old. And I remember it very specifically because it was just an epiphany. I just kind of went, this is what I want to do. This is what I enjoy. This is what I love. I love animals. I love nature. And more than anything, I love the ocean. And I think that love was sort of also fostered by the fact that my dad, was at the beach all the time. He took us to the beach all the time. He loved fishing. He loved crayfishing. And so he would always take us along with him. And I think it's just a sort of natural love that started to grow for nature. And from very early on, I spent a lot more time outdoors than I did indoors. I was always that girl playing in the trees or playing in the sand outside or scratching around, picking up bugs. And I guess that from that age, I think everybody kind of knew that I was going to be, I would go into science in some way. If it wasn't, hardcore sciences, it would probably be teaching. So I think if I wasn't a scientist, I'd be a science teacher, to be fairly honest. But I think science was always kind of end game for me from a very early age.
For a lot of us, I think our education system starts to converge at around undergraduate, for different African countries. So maybe you can start with the undergraduate level, how you navigated it, because that's usually when also a lot of us start to become self-aware and we start to realize, okay, this is the course I'm doing and things like that. So how was the experience for you for undergraduates?
Yeah, so for me, my undergraduate experience was pretty rough. I think I wasn't 100% sure of what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do science. I knew I wanted to do biology, but beyond that, I didn't really know too much. My goal was always to do marine biology, but I was very open to, wherever life kind of led. But marine biology was always what I really wanted to do. And so I always kind of structured my undergraduate courses around that. Being in biodiversity and conservation biology, to be fairly honest, it was so interdisciplinary though that I didn't really have to take courses from many other faculties with my undergraduate degree. Just because I did biodiversity and conservation biology, we were all primed to do a lot of different things. So it was compulsory for me to do a bit of statistics. It was compulsory for me to do a bit of chemistry, biochemistry. It was compulsory to do, plant physiology, animal physiology, zoology, biodiversity, more broadly, ecology. And all of those different sort of fields were sort of mashed up into one sort of big degree. So for me, I kind of like that because I sort of started to see, what kind of topics or domains I gravitated towards more. And for me, it kind of always was more, numbers and data. Ironically, I was really bad at math during my undergrad. I had probably the lowest scores, but I really enjoyed it. It's just that the way that it was applied at the time didn't resonate with me. But when I moved to honors, I went from almost failing math to getting, A's in biostatistics, which kind of shocked me as well. But it was because I was applying it in a way that, just resonated with me and the way my mind works. So that was very interesting to me. How much I hated math in undergrad and how much I like numbers now is very, very interesting, to be fairly honest. But it's kind of taken me by surprise as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. A lot of us find some subjects distasteful, especially in the early stages of our education. And all along, it's just about how they're applied. Yeah,
definitely. And it definitely became like that for me. I mean, I sucked at statistics. I'm not even going to lie. I was so bad in maths and stats. And now it's just, I think I'm just seeing it in a new light, and I'm working with, data that is the kind of stuff that I do. I'm working with biological data sets, genetic data sets, and that's what I'm interested in. So when the math, becomes a part of that, it becomes a lot easier, I think, to understand and to see and visualize, rather than when you're doing, traditional hardcore mathematics or physics especially. Sometimes it's not that easy to visualize what you're seeing on paper, but it becomes easier once you really apply it to something that you're interested in.
So would you say that being exposed to a lot of those disciplines helped you to actually make a choice on why you'd like to major?
To be fairly honest, it had kind of the opposite effect. What happened was I started to become interested in everything. And that's why at the beginning I said kind of like a jack of all trades and a master of none, because I really do like everything. And I think that is a blessing and a curse for the type of, formal training that I had, was just that I was exposed to so much. And so I was familiar with so much, and then I became interested in so much. So it was actually very difficult for me navigating from that point, because even when I went from my honors to my master's and from my master's to my PhD, there was so much that I wanted to do. And I think that sometimes holds me back a little bit. It's just, I want to do so much and I want to learn so much and I want to apply so much, but really you can't do everything all of the time. And so it actually had the opposite effect, that, I liked everything, but silver lining was that I also then was able to integrate in many different environments. Because I had, a bit of knowledge of everything and I was also open to anything. It meant that I had a very weird career path. I was literally open to accepting any type of position. If I was going to be a window washer, I would have been a window washer. I would have just been the best window washer there was. And that's just kind of how I approach things. So my career, rather than me directing it, for me personally, it kind of grew organically from just experience to experience, just being open to positions. It kind of just led from one thing to the other for me. So for me, my career has been very organic. It's been much less directed than I think a lot of people think.
It's a unique path because you were able to get an experience from so many fields, and it also makes you a unique scientist because you don't think one-dimensional. You have a lot to borrow from. How was the transition from undergraduate to postgraduate for you?
It was difficult at first. I think it was difficult in the sense that, in a way, I had a lot more freedom about my time, about, the types of courses that I took. Where I also dedicated time, I had a lot of autonomy with that. And I also, could, for the first time, choose what I wanted to do a little mini thesis on with my honors, which then obviously grew to a full thesis with my master's. But I was very much in the director's seat for that. And that for me was very different because in undergrad, you're kind of just trained to follow the rules, you need to tick boxes. You have to submit X amount of essays that follow X format. But with postgrad, our postgraduate sort of was organized in such a way that a lot of it was on you. It was very autonomous. If you didn't want to do something, you didn't do it and you missed out and they moved on. Undergrad very much was like that too, but with honors, it was very different and you were very much thrust into the real world. Because we were there, all day, every day. I was there on the weekend. I had my first exposure to proper lab work. I had been doing lab work throughout undergrad, but that was my first time fully on my own. I was designing my first experiments, optimizing studies and protocols. And it was my first experience really taking ownership of that. And I think that was scary, but in a weird way, it's actually what made me realize that science was where I was happiest and what I wanted to do, because I also came into my own. So I don't do well in boxes, and I realized that with my undergrad. To be honest, I think academically I was the weakest student coming into my postgraduate studies. From the whole cohort, I was at the bottom. And by the end of it, I was one of the top students. And so I always like to tell people that, because it doesn't matter where you start. It matters what you do, once you get started. And I very much live by those principles. And I did that in honors. I gave myself a fresh start. I said, you sucked in honors. You did so poorly. You suffered, you had a lot of mental, issues, and it was just hard on you. But have honors be a clean slate. And, my professors at the time, I did know a lot of them in undergrad, but I saw them in postgrad as well. And they kind of did the clean slate thing with me. They forgot about how poorly I performed in undergrad. And because of that, just that clean slate was really amazing for me, because then, I cum laude in my honors coming from, almost failing undergrad. So, that doesn't happen very often. And it just showed me that once I do things that I want to do and I apply it in the way that I want to apply it and the way that resonates with me, the way I understand it, I'm not actually as dumb as I thought.
You bring up an interesting point of how we lecture our students and how the education system is set up. Like, what I'm getting is that for you, that freedom is what you really needed to come to your own. And graduate and below is really structured, where you have to do what the system says. But I think it's the beauty of postgraduate that you really get to own the research that you're doing, and set your own time schedules. And maybe we should be preparing students for that also, because I've seen the opposite, where people really excel when the system is rigid and then they're given the freedom they just fall away. But
Yeah,
anyway,
I mean, I totally agree. And I think that's also why I kind of am quite different as a trainer and as a teacher than, my trainers and teachers were a lot of the time. I'm a lot more flexible. I'm a lot more understanding of, if you can't learn it in the way that I'm teaching it, you're just not going to be able to learn it. And so I need to learn to teach a different way. And people don't often look at education in that way. It's kind of my way or the highway. But I think as soon as you stop doing that, students excel and they surprise you. And some of the weaker students will become some of the strongest students very, very quickly. If you just realize that as a trainer, you might not be doing things the best way either. So it gave me a lot of perspective.
And I think in our country, we have a problem of, tutors being trained just to deliver the content. It's more of content delivery and result, not really looking at how the students are learning, which type of students they are, and things like that. So it's encouraging that we have a tutor who looks at the bigger perspective. Humans can never all be the same anyway.
Yeah.
So now that we're at postgraduate level, we can talk about some of the research that you have done.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of my own research, my own personal research for my studies has predominantly been in marine biology, like I've mentioned. So I think from honors, my master's, now with my PhD, it's been very much rooted in marine biology, but also very much in taxonomy. So I look at naming and describing species. And now with my PhD, I'm sort of going and looking at species connectivity in terms of the genetics along the West African coast, hopefully also the East African coast eventually. But we're looking at species connectivity. We're looking at a lot of their population biology, the ecology, and also trying to draw bigger, sort of pictures and conclusions from that in terms of, evolution of these metazoan species. And what's been interesting for me now is, now that I'm working in bioinformatics, I've actually started to sort of, incorporate bioinformatics into my work as well. And so now I've started a whole genome sequencing project where hopefully, I hope to contribute to our sort of understanding of metazoan evolution. Because jellyfish are so understudied, there aren't many genomes, and the more genomes that are published, we're starting to see very interesting things in their genomes. Things that haven't been seen in the genomes of any other organism. And so I think that holds a lot of potential as well. We see them having a lot of potential for biomedical applications. We actually have groups now studying jellyfish for specifically, pharmaceutical applications or biotechnological applications. So, using them to turn them into products. They're being turned into protein shakes. They're being turned into food. They're being farmed in a lot more places in the world now. And when I started studying jellyfish, that wasn't really the norm, really. That was about 10 years ago. That wasn't really the norm. Nobody really worried with jellyfish. There was a few of us doing it, and it's already grown and exploded over the last decade alone. So that's been interesting for me to see, going from 50 people over here doing jellyfish to like 500. That's been nice to see, just the natural progression as we learn more about species diversity on the planet as well. It's nice to see how people's focuses are kind of shifting from, obviously the big sort of keystone taxa to the not so keystone, smaller things that you didn't know mattered so much. So that's been quite nice for me to see.
And, I think genetics are, at the foundation of humanity, really, and all living creatures. So the more we study genetics, the more we'll be able to unravel the mysteries that we are seeing currently. When you talk about application, as a pharmacist, I'm really interested because, drugs have always had that one big thing against them called side effects.
Yeah.
But if you can be able to design a drug specifically for someone, just for you, I think it would be the next step, because a lot of drugs, again, they work, but the side effects are just too much for patients. Yeah, it's just too much. Anyway, something I've thought about, I've always heard that, we have never really discovered the full extent of the oceans and all the species out there. So what are the interesting things that you found out in your research?
So for me, one of the very, very interesting things that I found out is that very recently we did sort of a global study on, all of the eastern boundary current jellyfish along the world. And what we found was that nearly all of them had a very similar pattern of evolution. And I thought that was really interesting. And the pattern of evolution kind of mimicked, the big meteorological strike that happened. I think it's in the Gulf of Mexico, that formed the Gulf of Mexico. And it kind of, a lot of the evolution centered around that. When that happened, the oceans changed. And we actually see that mimicked in jellyfish speciation. So we saw, an increase in the number of species that were out there. We saw them all follow similar patterns of divergence, of speciation. But what was interesting was that although many follow that same pattern, not all of them do. Even if they were in existence back then when, all of this happened and they kind of originated around the same time, not all of them still follow the same pattern, which is very interesting. Some of them, it's basically one species across the world. For other genera, it's multiple species in different places. Sometimes there are multiple species in one location, and that was something that was interesting because we didn't expect that with jellyfish, that there would be so much diversity. And one of the other very interesting things we found is that there's a lot more diversity than we thought. There's a lot of crypsis. So when you look at the genetics, for example, what looks like one species can be 12. There's a classic case of this genus called Aurelia. Aurelia was traditionally thought to be one species all across the world, almost. And a scientist came along and started to look at them in more detail. And with one study, I think they were split into 9. It's now grown to I think about 12 to 16 known species, and it just keeps on growing. And that's because of the genetics that has been, incorporated now. But then we see a lot of morphological plasticity where they either look the same everywhere or different everywhere. So that's been very interesting, and we are starting to see that it actually mimics a lot of the environments that they are in. And we're trying to now sort of start to build more elaborative models where we can actually prove that and say, it is because the temperature here is XYZ versus here that is actually causing them to speciate. Because the boundaries within the ocean is obviously not as simple as on land. The ocean is kind of homogeneous on the surface, but very heterogeneous below the surface. And then, modeling species, boundaries and things like that become very complicated. But that's what's been interesting is, how little we know with how much we still know. So that's been quite interesting over the last few years.
So almost approaching that, that time in I think it's the 1700s when they discovered electricity and it changed the world. Then 2000, we discovered the internet, it changed the world.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping genetics is not going to change the world like that, for the better, of course.
Hopefully for the better.
Yeah. So I saw that you are doing a PhD currently.
Yeah.
So what is it about?
So my PhD is looking at both species identities along the West African coastline, but also species connectivity. I'm also trying to look at species boundaries, so seeing what level of mismatch do we have in terms of our own understanding at the moment. So we know that, a series of species occur in, XYZ place, and traditionally, we always thought that, you only get one species per large marine ecosystem. So my study is kind of investigating whether that's true. It's probably not true, but we're trying to look at the level of mismatch between how many species we actually identify versus how many we expected to see there for that large marine ecosystem, because it's going to tell us a lot about ecosystem, dynamics. It's going to tell us a lot about the population biology of the jellyfish. We're going to learn a lot about speciation and possibly be able to tie that to broader models, hopefully. But then the other portion of my study is also just looking at some of the population biology in detail of a couple of key species, and then also trying to build a reference genome for one of the jellyfish that we're looking at. And so I want to build a reference genome, not only to have the reference genome, but also so that we have more genomes available when we do any type of mapping in the future. But also with the hope that whatever pipeline I come up with as part of, sort of assembling and annotating that genome can then be made open source so that other people can use it particularly people working with non-model organisms, marine organisms, and gelatinous zooplankton in general. So I'm hoping that by doing a lot of this, I'm also putting a lot of information about how to do this out there. A lot of jellyfish biologists, taxonomists, we all kind of traditionally have worked in a lot of silos. And so what we do only is known to us. So I'm also hoping that with my project, I'm going to make a lot of things open source, a lot of my methods and stuff like that. So I'm just hoping that by doing that also, it helps a lot of other groups see that, maybe they need less than they thought to actually do this kind of work. Because we've been able to do it on a very low budget at the moment. And we've done a lot with the little that we've gotten. So I think it's useful to share a lot of those experiences, as well as the insights that we've been able to manage to get with, that those limited resources.
Yeah, it's good that you are making them open source and telling people how they can get into what you're doing currently, because we definitely need to encourage the younger generation. I've always given the example that a child who wants to be a musician has a lot of examples, but the child who wants to be a scientist.
It's a good example, actually.
Not so much. Anyway, there's the other side of, pursuing a science career, that is mental health.
Yeah.
And, science is a grind. You really have, especially what you're doing, you're pioneers in a field, so it's not a guaranteed, do this and you'll get the results. So how do you juggle that? Let's just start from undergraduate. How did you juggle that balance between pursuing your studies and, making sure that at least you're healthy, not mentally unstable?
Yeah, no, so I'm going to say I didn't manage it well. I think I'm managing a bit better now than I did back then, but definitely with my undergrad, my honors, a lot of my masters, because I was kind of studying and working at the same time a lot of the time, I think my mental health just naturally suffered. I don't think that anything I could have done would have probably prevented that, because I was just exhausted all the time and I was just taxed mentally. And I think that if I had gone back, I would have probably done things exactly the same way, which is sad to say, but it's the honest truth. I would have still overworked myself. I would have still done more than I probably should in order to get to where I was now. But I think for me at the moment, where I've managed to get, based on that sacrifice, the sacrifice kind of seems worth it. But I do see how I could have managed things a lot better back then. I was depressed a lot of the time. I still get depressed often now. I think every scientist can attest to getting depressed quite a lot actually in our careers. And it's for a lot of us, it's almost unavoidable because of the amount of pressure that we just naturally have on us. And not to say that other careers don't have the same level of pressure, they very much do. But that's the point, right? We're all under so much pressure all of the time. And I think goalposts keep changing, especially in science. At first, when you did a master's, you were very sought after. Now everyone has a master's. Now you have to do a PhD. And now that everyone's getting PhDs, now you have to do a postdoc. And now you've already seen jobs asking for 4 to 5 postdocs before they'll hire you. So I think that is very difficult and mentally taxing. But I think that we all kind of learn to deal with things in our own way. For me, what really helps is taking time out. Although that's the one thing I barely do. Because I just don't have that time to spare all the time. But one key thing is just take time out. Because time out really, it not just calms you down and eases your mind, but it gives you a lot of perspective. And a lot of the time I find that when I do take some time out, the task that I've been battling with for 2 weeks takes me 2 hours to complete. And I think that's unanimous for a lot of scientists and for a lot of people in our pressure environments. But for me, the key thing has just been take a break. And also I obviously like to go swimming. So just going to the beach or just being, taking a walk on the beach, that kind of calms me down and eases my mind a lot. And it has always done that. So I will be the first one to say I probably don't manage my stress and my mental health as well as I should. But I think that now that I'm getting older, I'm realizing how important it was to maybe have, managed and dealt with it better when I was younger, so that by now I've got my mechanisms in place, when I do feel down and out or I'm too mentally taxed. And I'm only now starting to find some of those methods that help me. So I think I'm a bit behind where a lot of other people are at my age, but I think to each his own, everybody's got their own journey. But I'm also a big believer in seeking help. So if you feel like you can't manage, it's because you probably cannot manage, and there's no shame in that, and there's no harm in admitting that either. And so I feel like if you are feeling overwhelmed or mentally taxed, there's absolutely no problem with going and seeking medical attention, because sometimes that is the only thing that helps. And I think it's important for us to not stigmatize that, but to also accept that sometimes we need a bit more help than we can give ourselves. It's a tough pill to swallow, but it's a pill we must swallow, I think, if we do struggle with our mental health.
Indeed, it's a tough pill to swallow, just especially, I think, for men. Ladies form friendships easier, and, they talk to their friends. But men, you have this culture of, dying alone. I don't know.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's why I think it's also important that it does get a bit more destigmatized, right? So that everybody is also comfortable looking, seeking for help and asking for help. That there's no stigma around it. And I think, a lot of groups have gone a long way with that now, recently. But I definitely think there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, you also mentioned about, the pressure that exists in science. And honestly, I don't think it's going away. I think society will get to a point where everyone is a professor. But maybe we should discuss how exactly we should handle that pressure, because it will always be that. There will always be more people getting masters, PhDs. The job requirements will always be there. So I always thought, being in a field that interests you would make things slightly better, because you get to enjoy what you're doing. What do you think?
No. So for me, I to be fairly honest, I've never thought that being in Africa would make things any easier. I think I've been very fortunate, I must say, within my time in academia, to be exposed to, a lot of African scientists and a lot of brilliant African scientists, and that made me feel more pressurized, right? Because I was like, oh my word, there's so much brilliance like across the continent. Like, how do you stand out, and how do you persist in, such an environment with so much brilliance? And that to me was very difficult to grapple with, because I always kind of felt like no matter what I did, I was not going to be as amazing as these people. And a lot of these people have done more amazing things with less resources than I had. And how do you compete with that? But I very quickly realized that I was looking at it like it was a competition, and it's not. I think everybody's starting point is very different. Everybody's opportunities throughout life is very different. And so what you accomplish is very different. But relative to your starting point, a lot of us accomplish big things, right? What might be big for you might not be big for me, but it's really big for you based on your starting point. And so I think when I started to look at life through that lens, I started to go, but, maybe I've not done that bad. And actually I've done that well considering where I started. And so did the other person next to me. And so when I started to view things like that, it kind of started to lift pressure. And I also started to change the way I looked at my own skills, because I must say when I entered Bionet, I felt very underskilled. There were all these big, data scientists and programmers from computer science backgrounds, and I was not that. And so that was very difficult for me to find a way to fit in. But I just realized that, hey, everyone has their own strengths. Everyone has their own weaknesses. What I'm really strong in, a lot of programmers and coders are not. And what I'm not strong in, they are strong in. And if I look at it in the sense that they can complement me rather than compete with me, we can build something that's a lot bigger than all of us. And so I've kind of just approached a lot of the things I've done at Bionet with that perspective. So if I couldn't do something, I didn't feel like a failure or felt less, I went, who can do it? And will they contribute to the project? And even if my contribution is finding other contributors, then it's a worthy contribution. And I think just reframing life like that, it stops being a race, and it stops being a competition, and it starts being a partnership. And so that's what I've been focusing on, is growing partnerships and not looking at any situation as me competing with somebody, rather than, us growing together and making each other better and being able to learn from each other. And once I started doing that, I just saw my development shoot through the roof, overall across the board, both personal, emotional, and also in terms of my academia.
And you mentioned being not the brightest student, so I think your coping mechanism is the most robust of all students, all scientists.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything in my life has kind of, culminated in the way that I think now. But yeah, I think maybe being a weaker student has given me a lot different perspective, because I do think that if I was on top all of the time, on top of my game, getting A's all the time, getting the scholarships, the sponsorships, then maybe I wouldn't have this way of thinking. And I see how much it's helped me just understand people's personal situations when we are in a work situation, and how, just being understanding just inherently of their personal situation, and just adapting the simplest things that you do, even just the way you conduct meetings, some simple things actually impact their lives in a big way. And I don't think I'd be able to do that if I didn't struggle a lot, throughout my life.
And maybe we should incorporate that into our education system, because it is so competitive based. Making that transition from competition into partnerships, not everyone does that, honestly. And that's
but also we're not there to, right? Yeah. We're not there to think of the person next to you as a partner. You're kind of with the education system wanting to just get good marks and do better than the person sitting next to you, because then you're excellent. And I think that's a very big disservice that the current system does to us, because like you're looking at the person next to you as a competitor rather than somebody who's on the same learning journey with you, and who's probably feeling the same way about you, right? And I think that that's where our system fails us quite a lot, is that it's more about being better than the other person rather than just being your best self. And yeah, I think if we just sort of stop with, the A students and the grading and blah, 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 like I think a lot more average students would actually start to shine.
Yeah, indeed. Now, I'm also interested in how you made that transition from undergraduate to postgraduate, because it's usually a big block or a barrier for a lot of students. You just don't, everything is so well arranged from early education all the way to undergraduate. Then from there it's just blank. So how did you manage that?
Yeah, for me, postgrad was very much unfamiliar territory. I also didn't have anyone to chat about it, to just ask their experiences. So that for me was very difficult. And I think the way that I navigated it was just one day at a time. I always just told myself just one day at a time, one class at a time, one assignment at a time, and to not get overwhelmed. I just kept repeating and sort of telling myself, don't get overwhelmed, because when you get overwhelmed, you make bad decisions. So I always just told myself, one class at a time, one assignment at a time, one course at a time. But what I did also try to actively do was to actually form, a few friendships as well, a few good friendships during my postgraduate studies. And that helped me navigate everything quite a lot, to be fairly honest, because then there was a support system and a support mechanism. And I think I'm lucky with my formal training to come from a department where it was a lot like a family. And I don't think a lot of academics can say that. But I was very lucky in that our department focuses a lot on creating a very sort of friendly, very inclusive atmosphere. To the point where, our offices, where the students sit are right next to where the professors sit. So there's absolutely no demarcation of, status or anything like that. We all, had tea together, lunch together. And they very much did a lot of work in trying to foster a bit of a community spirit. So we did a lot of, field trips and things like that, whether big or small, just to, just improve camaraderie, like between staff and students. And I think that actually did wonders for a lot of us, because we then did start to form real friendships. And I think friendships and just having just one person that you can, confide in when you're having a bad day, that was, I think, the biggest form of relief at that point in time.
Yeah, and the next hurdle usually after postgraduate is careers. Yeah, so how did you get that first career?
Yeah, so I've been working for a long time. Like I said earlier on, like I was willing to take anything. I'm still like that. Whatever opportunity presented itself, I kind of went for, and I see where it's just kind of saw where it went. So I got my first job at about 18 or 19 working in retail. I worked at a clothing store, and I did, clothing sales, and I did jewelry and cell phone sales and contracts and things like that. So very much a retail-based position. But then moving on from that, I worked there for quite a couple of years during my undergrad. Once I hit postgrad, I was given a few opportunities within the department to either obviously tutor some courses or act as a TA or act as a lab demonstrator. And I took all of those opportunities. So I did a lot of those jobs in parallel. And that kind of grew, organically to other positions within the department at the time. So I was a course coordinator for a year or two. And then I was a lecturer for a year as well. I lectured, undergrad biology. And I did all of that before I had even finished my master's. And then during my final year of my master's, something possessed me and I took an internship. And I did an internship for about a year and a couple of months with the National Research Foundation here in South Africa. And I was based at Iziko Museums, which is the Iziko South African Museums, which is also here in Cape Town. And I was in a dungeon all day doing like hardcore taxonomy. So I was just working in the collections and it was the best job, to be fairly honest. You felt like such a real little scientist, and I got to see so many awesome things. I was in a museum, so I got to, really interact with all of those crazy specimens that, the public does not see. And so that was very exciting for me. After that, I worked as an administrator, a departmental administrator for physics group, the Inter-University Institute for Data Intensive Astronomy, IDEA. That was it was a dual sort of position between the University of Cape Town and the University of the Western Cape. And I also did that for about a year. So I was working with a whole bunch of astrophysicists, just working in admin, development, outreach. And so I was the PA to one of the directors for developmental outreach. And so I just kind of helped her with all of our sort of outreach activities and stuff like that and did some budget management. And then after that, I joined HNA Bionet, where I've now been for the last 4 or 5 years. And I joined them as a bioinformatics training coordinator. So absolutely an uncoordinated career in life, if I can say that.
But it worked. Something maybe it comes from the education that you got. A lot of graduates think that just because I've done this course, I can't do a certain job. Just because I've done, but for you took everything.
No, so when I tell people I've done a million different things, and I mean I'm just counting my formal jobs, my full-time jobs. I'm not counting my part-time jobs or the things I did in between. There are lots of things I did in between as well, like little outreach things, handing out flyers, like whatever I could take. I really mean it, like whatever I could take, I could get. And I feel like that's benefited me because I never kind of feel like I can't walk into a position and apply myself. I never feel like something is beyond me because it can always be learned, right? If somebody can teach it, I can learn it. It's served me well so far. So
definitely mentorship has played a role in how you got, especially the latter jobs. So on the topic of mentorship, do you think it should be better structured, so that the students really get someone specific to follow? And what do you think that role could be? I'm trying to frame this question sweetly. The role of a mentor, let's say.
In
education.
I think mentorship has been very much downplayed throughout academia. The importance of it has been very much downplayed. Although we all understand the importance of mentorship, we all have a mentor in some type of way, a professor or a supervisor who, does some type of mentorship with us. But I don't think it's very formalized in the undergraduate system especially. And I think there's room for that. Now I know it's not going to be organic if you say, you must mentor this person, but I do think the structures can be put in place where people can say, hey, I am interested in mentoring. I'm only a third year student, but I'm willing to mentor, first year and be their buddy on campus. I think there's lots of room for that. And I think there might be sort of micro programs that exist within universities. So at my university where I study, at the University of the Western Cape, for example, they've got this buddy program, which is a mentorship program, but it's specifically for math, where a third year or an honors student would mentor a first year student, and they would have structured meetups the student can go to them at any point in time and say, like, I'm struggling with this equation, I need a bit of help, and they can arrange a meetup. And I always thought that was quite nice, and I always wondered why that didn't extend across the board. Because I feel like a lot of people would sign up and say, yes, I'm willing to be a mentor, and a lot of first years would say, I need a mentor. And so I feel like there's not any strong mechanism like that across any institution I've ever been at, although there are some programs, some small programs here or there, or, one department does it or one faculty does it, but I don't think it's unanimous, and it's not something that's really focused on. At least not in my experience, in the places that I've been in. It's not focused on, but I think there is a lot of room to improve that, because I do know that when you do have a mentor, you tend to go a lot further, a lot faster. Not just because they might be giving you help or guidance, but just to have that person to springboard ideas off of, who possibly has been where you are. That is very important, and it's invaluable. Just having somebody to say, but I've been in that situation and this is how I navigated it. This is how I got through it, or I haven't been in that situation, but I've been in a similar situation and this is how I navigated it. It just makes you feel like all's not lost. And sometimes it can be, the sort of, crux between, I'm going to stay in this line of work, or I'm going to leave, or I'm going to stay and continue my studies, I'm going to drop out. So I do definitely think that a lot more emphasis needs to be put on that.
Yeah, I'm starting to see the untapped potential in it, because you can imagine how much it could help solve this joblessness, pandemic that we have created.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we're almost done. Time has moved really fast, but there's this topic that we can't really finish without talking about. We've made a lot of progress in equality and making sure that men and women are on the same level. I was just today discussing with a very old nurse. She's retired. I think she's 80 years old. She was telling me that when she was hired in the 1960s, they were not giving women contracts, permanent jobs. We're just doing contracts for 3 years. And then you could renew, and then you're paid after the 3 years, not on a monthly basis. Yeah, and then there's no pension, and that was the government. That was in the 1960s. And even education, where we have come from, it wasn't necessary for ladies. Like at the time my mother was growing up, it wasn't necessary for her. She was an anomaly because she was educated. So we have come a long way, but I don't think we are where we should be yet. So maybe we can talk about if you have had any unique experiences as a woman pursuing a science career.
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I think for maybe a lot of other women, I don't want to speak for other women, of course, I'll speak for myself, but for me, I think a very sort of complex issue does still exist in academia, and that is just that traditionally all of the jobs were male dominated, and so many females within a space is, the only female there, or one of maybe 2 females or 3 females, but you're usually in the minority. And I think that has always been difficult, because it's not that you feel like you're in the minority a lot of the time, it's that others make you feel that way. You feel like you're a woman in science, and I think we need to stop feeling like we are women in science, and we just need to feel like scientists. And so I feel like one day when we don't have to do all these women in science movements anymore, that's when science has really transformed, right? When I'm just a scientist and I'm not a woman in science. But it's still been very difficult, and I think that we have come a long way. I can say from my personal experience, my experiences with men within the office has improved a lot over the years. But I am still saddened by the fact that there are still a lot of experiences that I do have where I walked into the room and I was the only female there, or one of the only females there, or I was young, or I looked young, and so I was just not respected. I remember comments from people saying, "Oh, the science is cute." No, it's not cute, it's serious, it's science. And you take those things with you and you kind of internalize it. And I think for a long time, I didn't want to communicate my science. When I did, I got a lot of stage fright. I still feel like that. Whenever I communicate my science, I always feel like there's going to be somebody who's going to do better than me. And I think that's just how women are kind of made to feel inherently in science. But I do want to say it has improved a lot. I experience that less and less, but unfortunately still experience it. I still experience situations where I'm, inadvertently told, you're a woman, you don't belong here, or you're not going to be as good as the male counterpart, you're not as strong, or you're not as smart, you're not as witty. And that happens way more often than I'd like to say, but it does happen. But I think that, to be fair, it happens to a lot of people. And so I've also just been trying to just remember that, whenever something is different within an environment, it's going to be shunned until it becomes the norm. And it's only going to become the norm when more women go there, and more women will only enter those careers if other women showcase them and show other women that, we do belong here and we do well, actually. We're not just part of the crew, we're leading the crew. And so I think that lots of women need to stop being scared of positions of power because they're scared of how it's going to, transcend onto everybody else, or how other people are going to receive it. I think they just need to own their space, own their right to be there. And be there, take up space and let other women see you, let girls see you, let them see that, these careers are not impossible and it's not just for men, it's for everyone. And I also want that to happen in a very organic way again. I don't want it to be forced, right? I want people to want that. But I think you get people to want that when you as a female are also just excellent within the spaces that you're in,
Definitely. When the young, the young children, the young girls can see scientists who are women, for them, they won't think that that's a woman in science. For them, they'll think that it's normal. And I think that's the end goal for us, for them to see that it's normal.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think we have seen some progress because I think in my undergraduate class, there are more ladies than gents. So it was never really a question of, is this a lady or a gent? It was always we're all in this together. So that was a good thing. And now to you as a tutor, I think we also have, as tutors, there's that responsibility to make sure we are not creating future thugs, to use a crude word, but we are teaching children to look at other kids as, just other human beings, so that if this other generation, the mistakes they made, they go with them, and we get a new generation that, just sees a human being as a human being. But that now is upon teachers again to make sure that, children are being taught the right way.
Yeah, and I actually like that you're saying that, because I very much feel like the reason why I'm the way that I am is because I was raised in an environment like that. Even though it wasn't always accepted when I was growing up and I was really little, it was still, boys things were boys things and girls things were girls things, and you didn't confuse the two. But my parents were really amazing in the sense that, if I was interested in something, I could do it. If I wanted to try something, I could do it. If I wanted to go play with the boys and kick ball, play in the sand, I could do it. It was no problem, right? Because I'm just a person, just like they're just a person. And without realizing, what they showed me was that I was equal. And I think a lot of women don't get that experience growing up, and so they have to find the equality within themselves or within other people sometimes, which is unfortunate, but that's sometimes what can happen. But I think for me, I was always just lucky to have parents that really just told me you can do anything, and if the world tells you no, do it anyway. Was maybe not the best lesson to teach a child, because I became very stubborn and hard-headed. But maybe that's also why I ended up succeeding, right? Because as much as the world told me no, I went, well, who cares?
So I feel the best way to end this would be to tell you, to ask you about an advice that you give your younger self. I don't know the age specifically, but assuming that you could talk to your younger self, which I know many people are in that stage and they don't know what the future holds. What are some advice that you would give, your younger self, or that young person who wants to be a scientist?
Yeah, so for me, a lot of my life has actually been framed around education, either consciously or unconsciously. And so when I think about what I would tell my younger self, essentially, I would just tell myself to relax. Not everything is the end of the world. Failure is good. Failure is not bad. Failure teaches you what you don't know or don't know enough of, rather than telling you that you cannot do it. So fail forward. never fail backward. And another thing I would tell myself is that learning is personal. And so when you're trying to learn from people who have standardized, that you might not do as well when you're within those boxes. But once you blur the lines a little bit and you start to do your own thing, you might actually realize that you're a lot more intelligent than the system made you think. And I think that's very important for a lot of young girls and just anyone to remember that's coming from a difficult time in education and in academia, is that we're walking on standardized grounds as unstandardized people. And so as long as the grounds are standardized, we might not excel as much. But as soon as we start to personalize those grounds, you see people like me come out of the woodworks who maybe wasn't, so much of a failure as a scientist.
Yeah, and I really like what you've said, that, it's a standardized grounds, but people are not standardized. And also maybe we need to tell people that there's a right way to fail and a wrong way to fail.
Yeah, there is a right way to fail, and that's very important, actually. I've also always believed that the first thing you should teach children is how to fail rather than how to win. But yeah, we kind of missed that. I think just as human beings, it's the natural inclination to want to win.
Yeah, and we forget that people also fail. So, I don't know if Sarah is around and she would like to say something. I've seen her in the chat room.
Hi, Verena. Hi, Denise.
Hi, Sarah.
I'm so excited to see you coming into this interview, and I just thought you should pop in. So, I don't know. I have a question that I'm curious about. What are you planning in the future for in your career or whatever you want to do after now?
Yeah, so I mean, pie in the sky for me is to actually do research my way. So in essence, I would like to maybe one day obtain my own research funding, maybe soon even, you never know. I would like to sort of start my own group where we can do, cross-relational research. Because I think, interdisciplinary research is where the future is. And so if I could start a group that, encompasses what I do, which is a lot of marine biology, taxonomy, genetics, and merge that with a bit of bioinformatics and also biodiversity informatics, which is a very up and coming field now. All of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but the people are talking about it a lot more now. That I think informatics has sort of taken a spotlight across the world. So if I could, form a group that just does, draw from all of those experiences and come together, I think that would be really fantastic, because I can only imagine the kind of research that we'd be able to do, and the type of insights that we get when we all come together. And I think HA Bionet and a few others, with the current DSI funding that they've just received, they'll be doing that in a sense. Actually, they'll be kicking off that whole process. So I mean, if I can slot into that process somehow, and be, key driver of that and a champion of that, then that's definitely what I would want. But more than anything, I'd also like to do some outreach, so some science communication, because I also think that is lacking for a lot of scientists. The communication and the outreach part of things is very much lacking. And so if I could start a group that actually, there's some funding dedicated to outreach and there's some funding dedicated to science communication, and everything we do is going to have a communication and outreach component, I also think the impact that we'd have, the direct impact, is going to be a lot higher than I think everyone that's working in silos and, you're just kind of posting on Twitter or Facebook or something just because you have to, or you just want to, drum up some presence. But if you can actually put funds into strategizing your SciComm, I also think you do a lot better with your research overall.
Okay, great. I know this space is just to help anyone who might come through your path or might want to do the things that you've done so far. And from the questions, I don't know if there's anything that you would want to add that you wish that you would have been asked or you would put out there for anyone who would watch this.
Yeah, so there's not much that I'd like to add. Maybe the only final thing that I would like to say is that if you believe that you should do something, you should do it. You shouldn't allow anybody to make you feel like you shouldn't. You shouldn't allow the education system to make you feel like you can't. because it very much often does do that. So I think if you have a vision in your mind and you believe that you are meant to do something, or want to do something, do it. Find ways to do it in your own way, because, the rigid, structured way is not the only way to do anything. Going to university is not the only way to learn. There are many ways to learn, and there are many ways for you to gain the knowledge that you need to do what you want to do. So my biggest lesson is find a way to do it. You want to do something, put in the work, put in the hours, put in the effort, put in the research time. If you have the money, put in the money, but do what you have to do what you want to do and what you believe you want to do, and don't allow anyone externally to discourage that, because it's very easy to do that for the right and the wrong reasons.
Okay, thanks. Over to you, Dennis.
Okay. You see the beauty of teamwork. I think I'd forgotten a few questions, but now that you're there, you ask them. So the point about communicating the science is really important, because it gives people hope when you see that people are doing research, to solve some of the problems that the world is facing. Bad news sells so much, and we could really use some good news every once in a while. But I think that was all for me. I can put my video back on. That was all for me. Thank you so much for being part of the interview.
No, thank you so much as well for inviting me and having me, and a very nice discussion, actually. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we do have other publications. I think we'll be last with Sarah, so that we can invite you for more interviews and discuss more concepts about the application and science. There's worldwide connections are how we all grow.
Definitely, I totally agree, and I'd always be open to chatting more. No problem at all from my side.
Thanks, Verena, for coming.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much, Seda, and thank you, Dennis. And nice to see you both live and in the flesh.
Do you want to start your own podcast? Start with some simple gear that you already have and a quiet space. Simple gear includes a microphone, editing software, and host of your podcast. Simple microphones include the ones on your phones and computers, or a simple recorder, which you can upgrade later. For the editing software, I use Audacity, which is free and simple to use. Buzzsprout, which over 1,000 other fellow podcasters like me use, is one of the podcast hosting providers you can use. Buzzsprout has helped me link my show on every major podcast platform. With the endless number and regularly updated tutorials and good customer service support Buzzsprout offers, my podcasting journey has been made easy. Following the link in the show notes, let Buzzsprout know we sent you, gets you a $20 Amazon gift card if you sign up for a paid plan, and helps support our show.